Did you ever stop to consider that the most ruthless, most calculated, most organizationally consequential moves in professional baseball never actually make the highlight reel? That the decisions separating championship-caliber front offices from mediocre ones are not the blockbuster deadline deals or the nine-figure free agent signings, but the quiet, surgical, almost invisible administrative maneuvers executed in the background while the rest of the baseball world is watching box scores? Because what Dave Dombrowski just did with the Philadelphia Phillies roster is the kind of move that gets zero mainstream coverage, generates zero fan excitement, and reveals everything about how a genuinely elite front office thinks when the structural integrity of its pitching staff is under acute pressure. The transaction wire reads Jonathan Bowlan, 15-day injured list, right groin strain. That is the official language. Clean, clinical, unremarkable. But the executive reality sitting underneath that transaction wire entry is a multi-dimensional chess move that simultaneously addresses a bullpen depth emergency, protects a vulnerable out-of-options reliever from the waiver wire, and buys the front office the precise amount of organizational time it needs to navigate a roster crunch that was always coming and is now arriving faster than the original timeline projected. We are going to pull every layer of this apart. The bullpen collapse that created the emergency, the Seth Johnson solution, and what a specific profile provides. The Bowlan IL mechanics and why the timing is, shall we say, administratively convenient. And the Zack pop situation, which is the real chess match hiding underneath everything else in this transaction sequence. Lock in. The war room is fully operational. Start with the structural crisis that made this entire administrative maneuver necessary. Because the Bowlan move does not exist in isolation. It is a response to a specific sequence of events that shredded the Phillies' bullpen geometry over a 48-hour window and left Rob Thomson staring at a relief corps that needed immediate reinforcement before the next series began. Andrew Painter's scratch from his scheduled April 12 start was a triggering event. When a starting pitcher is removed from a scheduled start without adequate advance notice, the ripple effects through the bullpen structure are immediate and severe. The game plan built around 5 to 6 innings of starting pitcher coverage collapses, and the bullpen is asked to absorb innings it was not prepared to absorb at that specific point in the roster cycle. Rob Thomson's response, deploying Zack Pop as an emergency opener and then bringing Painter out of the bullpen later in the game, was a creative tactical solution to an impossible in-game situation. But creative tactical solutions to impossible situations carry organizational costs that do not disappear when the final out is recorded. The arms used in that sequence arrive at the next series with reduced availability. The bullpen depth chart that looked adequate 24 hours earlier now has multiple pieces operating on shortened rest, and the margin for error in the relief corps has compressed to a level that a front office operating under a championship mandate cannot comfortably accept entering a new series. The math was clear. The Phillies needed a fresh arm capable of providing multi-inning coverage, specifically the kind of length work that protects the premium leverage pieces from being overextended in games where the starting pitcher cannot reach the 6th inning. They needed that arm immediately, and they needed to acquire it without triggering the kind of roster cascade that would create new organizational problems to replace the one being solved. Seth Johnson in AAA Lehigh Valley was the answer the organizational depth chart provided when the front office asked the right question. A 3.00 ERA at the minor league level with demonstrated multi-inning capability is exactly the profile of bullpen in triage mode needs from an emergency call-up. Johnson is not being asked to be a high-leverage closer or a 7th-inning bridge arm. He is being asked to eat innings, to take the ball in the 3rd or 4th inning when the starter exits early, throw strikes, keep the deficit manageable, and give the premium bullpen pieces the rest they need to be available and effective when the game actually reaches the leverage situations where they matter most. That specific role, the long relief anchor who provides genuine inning volume rather than just high-intensity short bursts, is one of the most undervalued and most organizationally critical functions in modern bullpen construction. The analytics revolution in baseball has correctly identified the leverage-based deployment of elite relievers as the optimal strategy for maximizing bullpen effectiveness in high-stakes situations. But that strategy only works when there is someone available to handle the low-leverage innings that precede those high-stakes situations. Without a long relief presence capable of absorbing 3 or 4 innings when a rotation misfires, the entire leverage-based deployment system breaks down. because the premium arms get consumed by the innings they were never designed to handle. Johnson fills that specific gap with exactly the tool profile the situation demands. His arrival makes the rest of the bullpen construction function the way it was designed to function, and acquiring him required creating a roster spot on the active 26-man, which is where the Jonathan Bowlan situation becomes organizationally interesting. Let us examine the Bowlan IL placement with the forensic honesty this channel applies to every transaction, because the timing and the circumstances deserve direct analytical engagement rather than diplomatic circumspection. Jonathan Bowlan has contributed 0 high-leverage outs to the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen this season. His organizational role has been roster depth, the kind of presence that provides the front office with a defined option if the situation requires it, but that does not generate the kind of performance value that creates genuine roster protection pressure. He is a depth piece, and depth pieces in professional baseball exist in a perpetual state of roster insecurity because the organizational commitment to them is always contingent on whether a higher priority asset requires a spot they currently occupy. A right groin strain placed on the 15-day IL at the precise moment the organization needs to create a roster spot for a bullpen reinforcement is, at minimum, an administratively convenient biological event. The IL placement accomplishes several things simultaneously that a designation for assignment or straight roster move could not accomplish as cleanly. It removes Bowlan's contract from the active roster without sending him to the waiver wire. It creates a clean roster spot without burning an option on another player. And it establishes a 15-day window of organizational flexibility that allows the front office to manage the incoming roster crunch without making permanent decisions before the full informational picture is available. Whether the groin strain is a genuine medical event or a medically certified administrative tool is a question this channel cannot answer with certainty and will not answer with false confidence. What this channel can say with complete analytical confidence is that the IL placement accomplishes exactly what the organization needed accomplished at exactly the moment it needed accomplishing, and that the specific mechanism chosen, a 15-day IL placement rather than a designation for assignment, reflects a deliberate choice to preserve maximum roster flexibility while the more significant organizational chess match plays out. And now we arrive at Zack Pop, because Zack Pop is the real story hiding underneath every other layer of this transaction sequence, and the Pop situation reveals the full sophistication of what Dombrowski is actually managing here. Pop is completely out of minor league options. In the roster construction universe of professional baseball, that status creates a specific and acute vulnerability that the front office must manage with extraordinary care. An out-of-options player cannot be sent to the minor leagues without first clearing waivers. And clearing waivers means exposing the player to a claim from any of the other 29 organizations, losing the asset entirely for 0 return. Pop has demonstrated genuine major league capability. He is not a player the organization wants to lose on waivers. He is a legitimate bullpen piece whose option status has simply been exhausted by the natural timeline of his development. Protecting him from the waiver wire while the roster crunch is being navigated is a genuine organizational priority. And the Bowlan IL placement directly serves that priority by creating the space required to keep Pop on the active roster without forcing a decision that the front office is not yet ready to make permanently. Here is the specific organizational clock that makes this protection so important right now. Zack Wheeler is approaching his return from the injured list. Wheeler's return is unambiguously positive for Philly's competitive outlook. He is the anchor of this pitching staff, the arm around whom the entire rotation construction is organized, and getting him back into the starting rotation makes this team measurably better by every available metric. But Wheeler's return creates an immediate roster arithmetic problem. Taijuan Walker has been occupying a rotation spot during Wheeler's absence. When Wheeler returns, Walker gets displaced from the rotation and pushed back into the bullpen role that the organizational depth chart originally projected for him. Walker returning to the bullpen means one fewer bullpen spot is available for the current relief corps population. And when the bullpen population exceeds the available roster spots, someone gets designated or sent down. Without the Bowlan IL placement creating temporary roster flexibility, Pop will be the most likely casualty of that Wheeler return crunch. He cannot be optioned. The only available mechanism for removing him from the roster is a designation that exposes him to the waiver wire and likely costs the organization an asset that is genuine value. The Bowlan IL buys the front office the time required to manage that crunch on their own terms rather than being forced into a reactive decision the moment Wheeler is clear to pitch. Every day of that 15-day window is organizational leverage. Every day is another opportunity for a different roster solution to emerge, for another team to create a trade opportunity that moves a piece without waiver exposure, or for situations to develop in ways that the current informational picture does not yet allow the front office to anticipate. This is what genuine front office sophistication looks like in operational practice, not the bold public declarations, not the press conference announcements of major acquisitions, the quiet management of competing organizational priorities through precise deployment of every available roster mechanism executed in the background while the games are being played and the standings are being watched. Dombrowski identified a bullpen depth emergency and solved it with Seth Johnson. He protected a vulnerable out-of-options asset from waiver exposure by maintaining roster space through the Bowlan IL. He bought himself the organizational time required to navigate the Wheeler return crunch on his own terms rather than being forced into a reactive decision under deadline pressure. And he accomplished all three objectives through a single transaction sequence that generated approximately 47 words of transaction wire coverage. That is chess. That is the executive version of the game being played at its highest level. And the Philadelphia Phillies are fortunate to have a front office operating with that level of sophistication at the exact moment the roster geometry is demanding it most. The war room is yours now. Drop your complete evaluation in the comments. Does the Bowlan IL placement read as genuine medical triage or calculated administrative maneuvering? And more importantly, how does Dombrowski solve the Zack pop situation when Wheeler returns and the roster crunch arrives in full? Bring your most ruthless roster construction analysis. Hammer that like button for the deep organizational intelligence this channel delivers on the moves that never make the highlight reel. Lock in your subscription because the transaction wire is moving faster than ever and the war room is always ready to decode it. The 40-man roster never sleeps, and neither do we.